Spotify for Podcasters lets you record and edit podcasts right from your phone or computer. So no matter what your setup is like, you can start creating today. With Spotify for Podcasters, you can earn money in a variety of ways, including ads and podcast subscriptions. And best of all, it's all totally free with no catch. I highly recommend you give it a try. Download the Spotify for Podcasters app or go to spotify.com/podcasters to get started. Today, I am pleased to introduce you to the man behind the magic that will be the Wolf Hall weekend coming in June 2024, David Holland. David, welcome.
Yeah, hi, Rebecca. Thanks for having me.
Well, let's begin maybe with a short introduction. Can you tell everybody who you are and what your involvement with Dame Hilary Mantel is?
Yeah, so I'm David Holland. I've spent half my life in publishing with HarperCollins Publishers, both in the UK and Australia, actually. And I retired quite early before Hilary became a star, I hasten to add. But I kept up with the world of books and the Booker Prize in particularly. And I have to confess that my personal discovery of Hilary Mantel's genius came much later than most people. In fact, I confess that Wolf Hall, the first of the trilogy, sat on my bookshelf for many years unread. Can you believe? So let me explain why that is the case. I spent a life in books, and I worked with lots of great authors over the years, helping to market their work. And Hilary came along just after I retired from HarperCollins, but the connection was quite magical in itself because my wife and I left Australia, came back to the United Kingdom, and we lived down in Devon. And for those of you who know about Hilary Mantel, she lived in this tiny little seaside town called Budleigh Salterton, which subsequently became the venue for one of Britain's biggest literary festivals, believe it or not. And Hilary was the president of the festival, and in fact, I'm looking forward to attending the next festival in September this year, which will be great. But Hilary lived in Budleigh Salterton, and without me knowing that she was there, my wife and I moved into Budleigh Salterton to live for a couple of years. And during that time, my daughter got married, and we rented the Tudor mansion, which is called Cadhay House, which is just up the road from Budleigh Salterton, as the venue for my daughter's wedding reception. All of this conspired to produce the Wolf Hall weekend, because when I finally decided to read Hilary Mantel, it was one of those moments. So about 3 years ago, I said, okay, I've got more time in my life. I'll pick up the first volume. And that was it. I could not put it down. Now I believed all of my friends who said, have you read Wolf Hall yet, David? And I said, no, it's on my list. And I became an addict of Hilary completely, hook, line, and sinker. And then I realized why she's only one of 4 authors all time to win the Man Booker Prize twice. She's up there with some major celebrities of English literature, Margaret Atwood, for example, Peter Carey, who I knew from Australia. I've read everything Peter Carey had written because I helped market his books in Australia. But so here we are, and I was in the middle of Bring Up the Bodies, which is the second in the trilogy, which includes the execution of Anne Boleyn. And in fact, that's where it ends. And I was halfway through that when the sad news came on the air that Hilary had passed away suddenly last year, 2022, in September, October, I think it was. And I was devastated because like so many of her readers, when you read her trilogy, you not only enter the world of Tudor England in a way that I've never done reading any other fiction before, but you also feel as though you know Thomas Cromwell, the star of her trilogy, but more than that, it's as if you've become friends with Hilary. And so many people unsolicited have said similar things to me. So that's her gift as an author. And I remember reading at the back of her note in Bring Up the Bodies that she thanked a guy called Rupert Thistlethwaite, which is a very old English name, difficult to say if you've had a few glasses of wine. And he is the current owner of Cadhay House, where my daughter's wedding reception is. So I knew Rupert. And so I'm now reading in the back of Hilary Mantel's book that she's thanking him for his many invites to her and her husband, Gerald, to visit the house. And it was just one of those moments when a light came on in my head. It was early January. I just got the newsletter, the annual newsletter from Cadhay House saying, don't forget us if you want to come back. And I rang Rupert and said, why don't we do a celebration of Hilary and her Wolf Hall trilogy in particular and base it at Cadhay House? And he just said, well, that's a no-brainer. Let's do it. And that's how it all began. So that tells you a little bit about my background with Hilary. I did meet her briefly once. I was not introduced to her, but I do recall my son and I were in a gift shop in Budleigh Salterton, the little seaside town I mentioned where she lived. And I remember seeing her talking to the owner of the gift shop. And both my son and I were completely taken aback by one of the most interesting conversations I've ever eavesdropped on in my entire. She was so eloquent. She was so lucid. It was everything was. It was as if you were listening to a BBC broadcast on something or other. And we couldn't leave the shop when we both eventually peeled ourselves out. I didn't have the courage to introduce myself, but that was my personal experience of Hilary in the flesh, as it were. So it's a great privilege to tell you that when I then started to approach people who I knew either knew Hilary or had worked with Hilary over the years, they unanimously, without reservation, all put their hand up and said, yes, please, let me be part of this. So the speaker lineup, which you can see, and which I know you're going to help promote as well, thanks, Rebecca, for that, it is very much a lineup of both people that were involved with Hilary from a historical point of view, but also people who literally worked with her on her books beyond the trilogy, because she published lots of novels which had nothing to do with history at all. So I've got a great mix, I think, of people from her literary side, but also from the historical side. And of course, it's all about the Tudors, which is where that you and I connected, really, because I knew how devoted you and your listeners are to the Tudor era, and I'm sure many of them have read Hilary's trilogy, but probably many of them have not equally as well. I mean, it is a big commitment.
It is. It definitely is.
2,000 pages if you read the full lot. But so my personal addiction to Hilary was, I have to confess, first a literary one. She takes a relatively unique stance in the trilogy in particular. She experimented. And I remember reading her saying that she knew it was going to be magical halfway through the first page when she was writing it. She decided quite radically to write it as a narrator, but through the eyes of Thomas Cromwell himself. So that really makes it a unique and a very, just from a literary point of view, to lock yourself in to one point of view and to take the liberty of also being a narrator through that person's eyes. Immense skill. Just shows her prowess. as a writer of English of great English literature, and she deserves those prizes and a lot more. In my mind, she's up there with, for me, she's up there with Ernest Hemingway, James Joyce, the greats in my humble opinion, and Emily Bronte, and so on. And I think my great grandchildren and so on will be studying her. I hope anyway when they study English literature at school in the future.
What a legacy!
Yeah, amazing. So I believe that this deserved celebrating, that this heritage, this legacy that she's leaving behind, as you say, deserves to be preserved. And I know there've been several little minor tributes. There was a wonderful memorial service to Hilary, Southwark Cathedral in London, which I was privileged to go to. The Lively Salterton Literary Festival have got a couple of little 1-hour slots going on in September this year, with Ben Miles, the actors, coming down just to pay tribute, and a couple of other. Somebody's going to be reading from the book, so that's lovely. But I felt that we needed to. I was quite happy to take responsibility to try and create a bigger event, because I feel that the work deserves greater immersion, and there's so many of us that just want to talk about it together. And not, and I'm also a historian by education, so my background was as a high school teacher. So I studied education. So that was what I did at university. But my two main subjects were history and geography, with a little bit of religion thrown in as well, comparative religion, which I then ended up teaching specifically history at high school. And although I never taught the Tudors, because my specialist subject was 20th century modern European history, which was a big favorite with high school examining boards. My own education at high school was deeply steeped in the Tudors. So those of your listeners who grew up in my era, which was a little while ago, will remember a historian called Elton, and he was like the definitive work. And in fact, it's not really. I mean, there's been several, as you know, there's been several biographies of Thomas Cromwell. And of course, the latest one of particularly critical note is that by Dermot McCulloch, Thomas Cromwell Alive. And I was really privileged to meet Dermot just a couple of months ago at Hilary's memorial service, and we ended up chatting for a long time. He was very generous with his time, and he said he was really excited to be the keynote speaker at our weekend. So we reminisced about our own reading of the trilogy, and of course Hilary and Dermot did speak on the same platform. So they were invited to speak on the same platform, which was a bit of a difficult situation, because in a way it's easy to think of Hilary's trilogy as a biography of Thomas Cromwell.
I can see that.
Which it's not. And so when they were together on stage, they would Hilary would very quickly say, I've not written a biography. I've done the homework. And she studied Cromwell's life, and particularly his relationship with Henry and the Queens, and the political forces around the various families, the Boleyns, the Seymours, and of course the first part of the trilogy focuses predominantly on Cromwell's relationship with Cardinal Wolsey, and Wolsey's relationship with Henry VIII, and how that played out, and how through Hilary's eyes and how she saw Thomas Cromwell, how he sort of really cleverly maneuvered his way through that shift in power, and sort of out of nowhere ended up in the court of Henry as an advisor, and that I think is the real theme that got me hooked into the trilogy. So that's book one, Wolf Hall itself. And the reason, of course, it's called Wolf Hall, for those of your listeners who are not particularly aware of it, the reason it's called Wolf Hall is because that was the family home of the Seymours. And towards, as we get into Bring Up the Bodies, volume 2 of the trilogy, there is great emphasis on the shift in the attraction of Henry's attention towards Jane Seymour, away from Anne Boleyn, before he gave Thomas Cromwell the task of solving his now unwanted marriage to Anne Boleyn, and the machinations that went into that. And of course, for those of you that have seen either the play based on Hilary's trilogy or the TV series Wolf Hall, you'll know that is a really well interpreted in a very dramatic way by Hilary, in a way that is just, you can't put it down. I mean, the intrigue in there is phenomenal. And then, of course, as we go through to the third in the trilogy, The Mirror and the Light, then we're looking at the rise, the ultimate pinnacle rise of Thomas Cromwell's power, which was phenomenal. I mean, he was made a Lord Essex, which was amazing, from somebody who came from very, very lowly status, a blacksmith's boy, according to Hilary, although that is debatable. But so when Hilary and Dermot McCulloch would end up on stage together, there would be this banter which they would have, which is how much Dermot appreciated Hilary's interpretation, but how Hilary was at great pains to say, but this is just my interpretation. And of course, once McCulloch's biography of Cromwell was published, which I'm halfway through at the moment, I've been really busy, but I'm committed to finishing that pretty soon. The historian in me is constantly doing what I think everybody else is doing when they read it. If they've read Hilary Mantel, is saying, "Oh, okay, so that was fiction, and this is the fact." And I don't know if you wanted to ask me some questions, otherwise I'll just keep talking.
Yeah. Well, I do want to go back to, you mentioned the amount of research that she put into these books. And do you think it had something to do with her training as a lawyer that gave her such a forensic approach to research and developed her ability to get into the heads of her characters?
Yeah, I can see. Yes, absolutely. Sort of, it's the clinical approach to detail that comes through her work. And I'm not a reader of historical fiction, by the way. I'll put my hand up and say she's the only. Well, yeah, I'm trying to think. Certainly, anything from the Tudor period, she's the only historical fiction writer I've read. I've read other historical fiction, but from different periods. But and she wrote, I don't know if you're aware, Rebecca, but she wrote another massive tome called A Place of Greater Safety, which was one of the first books she ever wrote, where she was sort of cutting, which is based on the French Revolution. So she takes three of the most prominent characters from the French Revolution and looks at the revolution through their lives. So you can see the approach that she eventually took in Wolf Hall, and being sort of tested out. And it took a while for that book to get published. So that actually she couldn't find a publisher for that for some time. But so she did bring a lawyer's view in terms of the clinical, factual loyalty to real events and real people and what you can find from the historical. But I have heard her say on some interviews that when she first thought about university, she wanted to be a historian. So that was always latent and always sat there. with her. But yeah, it's the attention to detail that also captures readers of her work, but she doesn't do it in an over descriptive way. So she doesn't describe the eating utensils down to, or she doesn't describe people's wardrobe down to great detail. She doesn't describe she doesn't spend 3 pages like D.H. Lawrence used to describing the inside of a house. It's done in a couple of lines, but it's enough because she knows she can draw upon the reader's own imagination. And that's what, for me, ultimately meant that I couldn't put her books down, is that her imagination melds in some way if you're prepared to let it. And my son-in-law, who's going to be at the weekend, he actually is a lecturer in modern American history and politics in England. Can you believe?
I can believe it.
Yeah, so he had fun over the last few years, I can tell you. But the interesting thing in there is that he and I are both fans of English history. And I said, "Oh, have you read Wolf Hall?" And he said, "No, I just couldn't get on with it." He said, "No, I just couldn't." He said, "I tried to read about 20 pages." And I said, "Oh, if you just read the 21st page." I said,
there.
"Yeah, that'll do it for you." It's like, because once you let her into your imagination, once you let her utilize your imagination as a reader, she's got you.
Yeah, that's the best part about reading, isn't it?
It is. And sometimes, there are great writers who you enjoy reading the result of their imagination. But that skill that Hilary had, which to draw you in so that you're standing right next to Thomas Cromwell with her in those scenes. And so then when if you watch the TV series, I think, is it on what channel is it on in the States?
It's on PBS, I believe.
PBS, yeah, that's right. Yeah. Awesome series. Hilary said that she thinks the writer of the series actually did a better job of some scenes than she did in her book. So that's high praise coming from Hilary. And I
beautifully filmed with the natural light and the candlelight. We've never seen anything like that really before.
No. And of course, modern technology and cameras, they were using the latest version, where you could, and it was an experiment, I was told, in some ways with that. They didn't know if it would work. And that added to the ambiance, did it not? In some of those scenes, which were just amazing. And they're filming. I do know that they're actually in production on The Mirror and the Light.
Yay!
For that series. The play version, which was co-written by Ben Miles this time, by the way, which was fantastic because I know how close Ben and Hilary were, and I think she invited him to help her produce the Mirror and the Light, which I've not read the final chapter, by the way.
I was going to ask if you had finished it yet.
No.
All right, you'll get there someday.
Or not. Yeah, it was really funny. I told Rupert Thistlethwaite, who owns Cadhay House, that I hadn't been, I couldn't read the last few pages because I didn't want Cromwell to die. That's how hooked I was. And he just laughed and said, "Me too." I said, "Isn't that weird?" I said, "No, I don't want it to end. I'll go back and read the whole thing all over again, and maybe I'll, I know the ending. Of course I know the ending.
Right. We all know the ending.
Yeah. And what's interesting is, and it was an ignoble end for Cromwell himself. He was the victim of his own success in a way, within the power arena of England at that moment in time, where the old rivalries were raised up in big time against him. And he, at that point, he just found himself on the wrong side of the line in relation to Henry, who was disappointed with the choice of Anne of Cleves, which there's a great argument of why Henry didn't take to Anne of Cleves. And I've heard people say, well, I can't see why not. She seemed a perfectly attractive woman. And some people have even said she was probably the most queenly of all of Henry's wives. She came from that, the right pedigree to be, a magnificent Queen of England. Just didn't quite work out,
right?
Unfortunately.
Yeah.
So Cromwell got stuck in there, but also there was a big. Henry seemed to have second thoughts about his faith. On the one hand, he was quite happy to be head of the church, create the church in England, make that break from the Pope, the Pope's authority over the English church. But on the other hand, he wasn't necessarily willing to entertain anything to do with what Dermot McCulloch in his biography calls evangelicalism. He said that's really that's what they called themselves at the time. They didn't call themselves Puritans. They didn't call themselves Lutherans. Evangelicalism was a catch-all phrase for people who were wanting greater purity within the faith, which was spreading right across Europe and had already taken a much greater hold in parts of Europe before it ever reached England in any great. But the translation of the Bible into English obviously was a major, and there were 2 or 3 English clergy who pioneered that, and so on. We know, and the rest, of course, is history. We know that. So these are the sorts of discussions and debates. We're going to be having panels. We've got some literary critics who are going to be debating Hilary's skill as a writer. We're going to have we've got a couple of well-known people on your podcast, Dr. Lauren Mackay and Dr. Elizabeth Norton,
yes,
who are joining us. I think people are aware that Dr. Elizabeth Norton is an expert on Jane Seymour, and in fact has written the only biography devoted to Jane Seymour, which I find incredible, given the role she played in English history, right, even if only for a short period of time.
Yeah, she's been very underrated. It's nice what Dr. Norton has done with Jane Seymour to bring her to light a little bit more.
Yeah.
I am curious, David, before we continue, I want to know, when it came to Thomas Cromwell and Hilary, was she always interested in him, or was this a subject that somebody brought to her and said, we want somebody to write about Thomas Cromwell?
Well, I'm not aware that anybody came to her. Her publisher didn't say, well, why don't you write a book? No, she didn't operate like that. So I think what she discovered, from what I've heard on various interviews that she's given, I've heard a couple of points on this. I did hear her say that she did have a long time fascination, going back 20 odd years, in Thomas Cromwell as a character, because he was brought to the fore by a play by Robert Bolt called A Man for All Seasons, which also got made into a movie and won various Oscars. So it was known both sides of the Atlantic, where Thomas More, Saint Thomas More, let me give him his correct title, Sir Saint Thomas More, was portrayed as the innocent victim, if you like, of the English Reformation, and also Henry's desire to annul his first marriage to Catherine of Aragon and marry Anne Boleyn, and everybody had to sign the oath to say that they were happy for him to become the head of the church in England, which More wouldn't sign. So in that play by Robert Bolt, Thomas Cromwell is the evil villain.
Yes.
Who dastardly manipulates Thomas More into making this incredible confession, which we've still got. I mean, we've got the transcript of that trial, in which More says, you're going to put me down, not because of my view on this, but because I wouldn't agree to the marriage. And famously, Duke of Norfolk says, there we have him. Finally he's confessed. So all this is, beautiful, great drama, factual. We've got the transcript of the trial. But Hilary, I think, from what I heard, was sort of plagued by that in a way. And certainly the history teacher that I had, who was not Catholic, by the way, was very happy to celebrate the fact that England made the break from the Roman Church, as it were. And so I instantly resonated with Hilary's version of Cromwell, which was that actually he was probably one of the greatest figures of English history ever. Not necessarily because of his religious faith, and there's a big debate about what that actually looked like in reality, and that's one of the great themes within McCulloch's biography, where he does debate that. But also, Hilary wanted to say that he reformed England in a way that we are now, those of us that live here now, we'll all reap the benefits of the work that he did. Modern England could partly be attributed to Thomas Cromwell, and the work, the diligence that he brought to the governance of Britain, and how so many of Henry VIII's domestic policies particularly were shaped by Cromwell's influence in one form or another. And that's what got him onto the Privy Council, and that's what got him, Lord Chancellor, and eventually the Listics. What's interesting is that one of the other members of the Privy Council, and I think this was the link that Hilary had with Wolf Hall and the Cadhay House, where we're holding the weekend, is that Rupert Thistlethwaite is a descendant of one of the other members of the Privy Council from Thomas Cromwell's time. And I think when Hilary found that out, she decided that this was her closest link within a few minutes' drive from Budleigh Salterton, where she could enter into the physical spirit of the era. And so we've got, I've got a couple of people, one guy in particular who's going to be giving a talk at lunchtime about that connection between the house and the area and Thomas Cromwell. Thomas Cromwell himself never went to Devon, I'll confess. So, no, there's no record. He got as far as Somerset, which is next door.
Okay. Wow.
But, we can't find a record of Cromwell ever setting foot in Devon. I think it was the Giant of Cornwall, whom was a fabled figure from the Cornish rebellions that happened occasionally from time to time. The Western Rebellion, again, which rose up during Cromwell's own lifetime. Maybe it was the childhood fear of the giant from Cornwall who led the rebellion.
I have never heard of the giant from Cornwall before.
Oh yeah, the Cornish. Yes, worth looking up. Yeah, and how he could he could kill dozens of people with one swing of his axe or his sword and all that. It's a folklore. It's a folk tale. It's not, but it was quite real at the time. And of course, Hilary does a great job with that. The other thing I will say, and this is one, so there was lots of things we're going to be debating over the weekend. All of these things are up for grabs. Opinions will be stated, new opinions will be formed, disagreements will be, agreed on. All of that stuff is what we're hoping the weekend will generate, and also an ongoing debate. Because if anything, what Hilary brought to our culture in this time is a new way of looking at history, and begs the question. And a couple of critics and one of the critics that we've got coming to the weekend has picked up on this particularly, is what Hilary did seamlessly by almost a sleight of hand is she put a modern mind into Thomas Cromwell, because we can't ever fully imagine what it was like to be somebody in that era. Right. We can read what they wrote. We can read what other people wrote about them at the time. But to enter into the mind and skin of such a major character such as Thomas Cromwell, Hilary does seamlessly, but she sort of secretly, unless you know what you're looking for, she secretly put a modern mind into that skin, so that we can still resonate with it, so we can still identify with that character in a way that makes it so much more relevant. How accurate that is, of course, is up for debate, but it doesn't matter. Even if you realize it, you instantly forgive Hilary for doing that, because she's drawn you in, she's got you, as it were, in the Tudor era. You're there in Henry VIII's court. You're there at the beheading of Anne Boleyn. You're there when Mary Boleyn flirts with Thomas Cromwell, which is so beautifully portrayed, word for word, I have to say, in the TV series. That scene is a straight lift out of Hilary's writing, and deservedly so. It's brilliant work.
So I know anybody who is listening right now is a huge fan of the Tudors, or let's say royal history even, because we try to cover a little bit more than just the Tudors. But if they have yet to read Hilary's Wolf Hall trilogy, would you still recommend the Wolf Hall weekend for them?
Absolutely. Yes. I mean, you might be tempted to read the trilogy as a result, but you don't have to have read the trilogy. I mean, it's not. I must be straight with everybody. It's not going to be a Tudor fest, as it were. We're not. We are one little token to Tudor times. We are going to have a banquet. We're going to have a mock Tudor banquet in a great hall at Cadhay House on the Saturday evening. And if you only want to come for that, we've got minstrels, we've got people in traditional, authentic costume. So on the Saturday evening, we're going to let our hair down, our academic and intellectual hair down, and we're going to taste some good wine and some good food, and hopefully enter into the spirit of the Tudor era, just for one evening. But the reason I think it would appeal to anybody who's into history is that the house itself, Cadhay House, is amazing. And it's been quoted by the English Historical Trust as one of the most authentic Tudor mansions still habitable. And normally you can't get in it. Not unless somebody is going to hire the whole house for a wedding or for. So it's not a hotel. It's not open to the public per se. So we're very fortunate that Rupert, the owner, has allocated it to us for this weekend, so that we can. And this will be the first time that he's opened it to an event of this kind. So this is awesome. If you want to dress up as Tudors in your Georgian bedroom. And there are 3 rooms left, by the way. So anybody wanting to come and actually stay in the house, you need to get in quick. Contact Rebecca as soon as possible. Not to. So if that's the appeal, then please do. It's not a huge house, and the rooms there are limited. There's lots of accommodation which Rebecca can help you with in the area if you decide to come. But if you want to dress up, that's fine. But most of the house was faithfully restored during the Georgian period. So the front facade, where the main entrance is, you can see the Georgian windows straight away, which is a bit of a giveaway. But when you come round to the east elevation, it's still got the majority of its original Tudor facade there, with the windows and the whole look and feel. And so it's very easy to let your imagination go wild and to think that you're lord of or lady of the manor in the Tudor period and onwards in England. So for anybody that's not ever really immersed themselves in an historical weekend, I think this would be perfect. And if you've got an intellectual interest in English literature and great storytelling, then you double bonus, as it were.
I think this proves to be an exceptional weekend, probably something like nobody has ever experienced before. And
Sure.
I am so honored to be part of it with you because I think this
Yeah.
is fantastic, absolutely fantastic. So, David, if somebody right now wants to go and find out a little bit more about this event, where would you direct them to?
Well, I think as they're on your podcast, I mean, you've got some details there. Um, and there's a link which you've got, which will enable them to purchase tickets through your podcast, which would be fantastic. We'd love to see our friends across the pond, as it were. You're more than welcome, as usual, even if you did decide to leave, how many years ago? 450 years ago. Uh, you're always welcome back. As particularly for a weekend like this. And of course, in the area, just up the road, not far away at all, Sir Francis Drake had a house, by the way. Yeah, in the village, just up the road from Cadhay House. So there's a friend of ours called Nigel is very well equipped to give you a guided tour of the area as well. So there's that. And then, of course, not far away, nearer Budleigh Salterton, is the home of Sir Walter Raleigh, where he was born and grew up. So this little pocket of Devon is seeped in all, and then you've got the magnificent Exeter Cathedral, which is a stone's throw away, which is also seeped in history, going back, predates Tudor period by at least another couple of hundred years. So yeah, well worth an expedition.
Yeah, there's everywhere around you, isn't there?
Yeah, I live in a Saxon village.
See, we don't have that here in the U.S. We don't have that.
I live in a Georgian mansion that's been turned into apartments. That it sits right smack bang in the middle of a Saxon village that was made famous by Alfred the Great. When he did the treaty with the Danes. When the Danes invaded England, they got as far as almost where I am now, down here in Somerset. And while I don't think the treaty was actually signed in the village, it was named after the village because I think the church authorities at the time who approved, said yes, this treaty has been signed, came from around here. So yeah, the village of Wedmore. It's still got its Saxon square, although it's made up of people's private gardens now. But once upon a time, those houses formed a square, and the villagers all lived, inside the houses. It wasn't fortified, but they sort of protected themselves from wild animals and robbers and thieves by building their houses in a square and then having most of their life inside the square. Yeah. So, yes, sorry, steeped in history here.
I feel like if you live in a country where there is so much history around you, I bet it's easy to take it for granted as you walk by something like that, that it has such significance. Here, we come over to the UK and we see those things and we just melt over it and go, why isn't everybody looking at this?
Well, that's good. I mean, you have that role to remind us that we shouldn't take it for granted. So thank you for that. And your podcast is great. I've listened to lots of different episodes and enjoyed all of them, I have to say. So congratulations on keeping the spirit alive, as it were.
Well, thank you, David Holland, for joining us today to talk about the Wolf Hall weekend that's coming up in June 2024. And we have some exciting interviews coming up in the future. And maybe at the end, we'll just have you come back on and wrap it all up for us.
It would be a pleasure. And I'm sure I'll find some other tidbits from Hilary to pass on to you. I've stored a few of them away today, but I'll reveal them all next time.
Wonderful. Thank you, David.
My pleasure. Thank you for having me.